It was sent to me in an email with the subject line simply reading, "I still don't sleep with my window open." The sender said they had gone back and forth for months on whether to share this, because even writing it down made their stomach tighten. What happened to them wasn't dramatic in the way movies are. There were no screams, no chase scenes, no sudden reveal of a monster in the dark. And that's exactly why it still follows them. They said this happened when they were 19, during the summer after their first year of college. Their parents had moved out of state, but they stayed behind to work and save money, renting a small, older house on the edge of town. It was cheap, quiet, and backed up against a thin strip of woods that separated their neighborhood from an abandoned rail line. The house itself was nothing special. One floor, creaky hardwood, thin walls. Their bedroom was at the back, facing the woods. The window didn't have curtains when they moved in, just old blinds that never fully closed. At night, the darkness outside the window felt deeper than the rest of the room, like it swallowed light. At first, they liked it. It was quiet, peaceful. About 2 weeks after moving in, they started noticing small things. Nothing they could point to confidently. Just a feeling that the house didn't feel exactly the same at night. Sometimes when they were lying in bed scrolling through their phone, they'd get the sensation that someone was standing just outside the window. Not seeing anything, just that instinctive awareness you get when someone is watching you. They told themselves it was nothing, probably just the woods, animals, shadows. One night, around 1 a.m., they heard something light tap against the glass, just once. They froze, listening. Nothing else followed. They eventually convinced themselves it had been a branch or maybe a moth. The woods were close enough that it made sense. Still, they locked the window before going to sleep, something they hadn't bothered doing before. Over the next few nights, the tapping happened again. Always once, always late. Never loud enough to sound aggressive, but not random either. It always came from the same spot, near the bottom corner of the window. They tried staying awake to catch it, but every time they focused too hard, nothing happened. And every time they relaxed, it would come again, sharp enough to pull their attention instantly to the glass. One night, they finally worked up the nerve to look. They turned off their phone, letting the room go darker, and waited. When the tapping came, they slowly sat up in bed and leaned closer to the window. At first, they saw nothing, just darkness and their own faint reflection. Then they noticed movement, not in the woods, right against the glass. A shape shifted slightly, blocking what little starlight filtered through the trees. It wasn't a face, at least not one they could make out, just the outline of a head and shoulders, close enough that it couldn't be more than a foot away from the window. They said their entire body went cold. Before they could react, the shape leaned closer, and for a split second, they saw a hand lift and gently tap the glass again. Right where it had been every night. They dropped to the floor and crawled out of the room, heart pounding so hard they thought it might give them away. They spent the rest of the night locked in the bathroom with the lights on, shaking, listening for any sound. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning, they checked outside. There were footprints in the dirt beneath the window, bare footprints, adult-sized. They called the police. An officer came out, took a look, and shrugged. No clear evidence of a break-in, no damage. The footprints were too smudged to identify them. The officer suggested it was probably a prank, a neighbor messing around. But the sender knew better. They stopped sleeping in that room. They moved a mattress into the living room and kept every door and window locked. For a few nights, everything was quiet. Then they started hearing footsteps on the gravel path that ran behind the house. Slow, deliberate steps. Always late at night, always stopping directly behind the bedroom window. They never looked again. One night, they woke up to the sound of something scraping against the side of the house. Not tapping this time, dragging. They stayed frozen, barely breathing, until the sound stopped. In the morning, they found deep scratches in the siding beneath the window, as if someone had dragged their fingernails or a piece of metal along it. That was the day they broke the lease. As they were packing, they found something that made their stomach drop. Wedged into the gap between the window frame and the wall was a folded piece of paper. It was weathered like it had been there for a while. Inside, written in uneven handwriting, were 4 words. "I can see you." They moved out that same afternoon. Years later, they still don't know who it was. The police never found anyone. No neighbors reported seeing anything suspicious. The house was rented out again within a month, but the sender ended their email with one final line. Sometimes when I'm half asleep, I still hear tapping. The second story came from someone older, someone who said they'd kept this buried for decades because they were afraid no one would believe them. They were in their early 30s at the time, working as a night supervisor at a long-term care facility in a rural area. The building was old, built sometime in the 1950s, and sat far back from the road, surrounded by trees and empty fields. At night, it was just them and one other staff member. Most of the residents were asleep by 10 p.m., and the hours after midnight were usually quiet. Usually, there was one resident everyone avoided if they could, an elderly man who had been there for years. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was barely above a whisper. His chart listed advanced dementia, but the staff joked uneasily that he seemed far more aware than he let on. He had a habit of staring. Not blankly, intently, like he was studying you. The sender said they'd often catch him watching from his doorway when they did rounds, his eyes following them as they walked past. If they spoke to him, he wouldn't respond. He'd just keep staring. One night, during a routine check, they noticed his room was dark. That wasn't unusual, but what caught their attention was how quiet it was. No breathing sounds, no movement. They stepped inside and turned on the small lamp by the bed. The man was sitting upright, eyes open, staring directly at the doorway. The sender said they jumped, apologizing reflexively, but the man didn't react, didn't blink, didn't move. "Are you okay?" they asked. No response. They checked his vitals. Everything was normal. As they turned to leave, the man spoke. "He comes at night," he said softly. The sender froze, turning back. "Who?" they asked. The man's eyes shifted slowly toward the corner of the room, the darkest part where the light didn't quite reach. "He stands there," the man whispered, "and watches." The sender felt a chill but brushed it off. Hallucinations weren't uncommon. They reassured the man and left the room. Over the next week, the man spoke more, always at night, always about the same thing. "He doesn't like the lights. He waits until you're gone. He wears your face sometimes." The sender joked nervously with the other staff member about it, but the words stuck with them, especially the last one. One night, while doing rounds alone, they heard a call bell go off from the man's room. When they entered, the room was dark again. The man was lying flat, eyes open. "He's here," he whispered urgently. Before the sender could respond, they heard it, a soft exhale. Not from the bed, from behind them. They spun around, flipping on the overhead light. The room was empty. No one behind them, no one in the corner. They laughed shakily, blaming their imagination, and turned back toward the bed. The man was smiling. Not a warm smile, not even a human one. His lips were stretched too wide, his eyes fixed on the sender with something that felt like satisfaction. "He likes you," the man said. "You look at him." The sender left the room and didn't go back until morning. A few nights later, the man died in his sleep. The facility went quiet again. Too quiet. Then the sender started noticing things, reflections that didn't line up. Faces in the glass that lagged behind their movements by just a fraction of a second. Shadows in corners that felt heavier than they should. One night, while checking a supply closet, they caught their reflection in the metal door. It didn't blink when they did. They slammed the door shut and backed away, heart racing. From that night on, they felt watched constantly. Not by the residents, by something else. The final incident happened near the end of their shift. They were alone at the nurse's station, filling out paperwork, when they heard footsteps approaching down the hall. They looked up, expecting the other staff member. What they saw made their blood run cold. Someone was walking toward them wearing their face. Same hair, same uniform, same posture. But the eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty. The thing stopped a few feet away and tilted its head. "Don't look at him," it said in the sender's own voice. "He doesn't like that." The lights flickered. When they came back on, the hallway was empty. The sender quit the next day. No notice, no explanation. Years later, they still can't look at mirrors in dim light. They still cover reflective surfaces at night. And they ended their story with this. I know it's still there. I just don't think it needs me anymore.